Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to IPFW's Mastodon Career Calls. This is something that we do every month. We pick a topic of interest that would help you achieve your career goals, and we ask a speaker who has kind of a certain expertise in a specific area to be the presenter. And I'm really excited about today's presenter. We have Tony Hudson from Blue Jacket, who's here to talk to you a little bit about job search and interviewing tips for ex-offenders. And I really like Blue Jacket's kind of motto or tagline that everybody deserves a second chance. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and he'll kind of instruct you on how to ask questions and navigate you through this presentation.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for having me and for inviting Blue Jacket to be a part of this webinar. I have been the executive director now for 7 years at Blue Jacket, and I do too like the tagline, "A second chance is everybody's business." And so we began serving people with criminal convictions when we launched, and our mission is to provide the tools and opportunities to adult ex-offenders to be productive members of society. However, our job readiness training and our networks with employers have become so good that there are nonprofits that are paying for our services right now, which is a great partnership to have to serve other people, including homeless and those in poverty and veteran. So I move on to the very first question, which is, what do you think the most important question employers are trying to answer during their hiring process, not only the application, but the interview? And you're more than welcome to type in an answer, and as you type in those answers, maybe we can take a small poll. But the most important question employers are trying to answer during the hiring process. Because I see no one typing in any answers, what I'll go ahead and do is tell you they want to know if they can trust you. So there have been studies that 70 to 80% of and are you a good fit? Thank you. Yes, are you a good fit for the organization? And sometimes we talk at Blue Jacket in our Career Academy, which is a 4-week training that is based on the foundation of trust. That how can you learn to trust someone? And typically trust takes two things. It takes time and it takes effort. Trust is a lot easier gauged with people's actions than they are with their words. And so many times an employer, they're going to gauge whether you have a felony conviction or not as a candidate for employment if your actions in the past, whether it's in the last year, 6 months, or even 10 years, have proven to me that you'd be a trustworthy employee. What is your turnover? How many jobs have you had? Where have your activities been in the last few months in your job search? How hard are you searching for jobs? So trust is the common denominator, but of course when it comes to someone with a criminal past, it means much more than someone without. So I want to move into some of the factors when we as consumers go out to buy something. And so I use a metaphor throughout our training. Again, it's called our Career Academy at Blue Jacket. I'll tell you a little bit more about Blue Jacket and our services later in this presentation. But we tell our students that a vacuum sweeper becomes a metaphor. But when you are considering buying something, think of a cell phone or a suit or a car or even just a vacuum sweeper. What are you looking for? What kind of factors go into that purchase? You can go ahead and as you see a question mark at the beginning of these slides, go ahead and type in an answer if you'd like. And if not, then I'll continue to move forward. But sometimes there are things that salespeople have to become very good at. So whether it's door-to-door sales or it is someone who's working at, say, for example, Walmart, you have to know. And thank you, Rachel. I see that you wrote you take into consideration high quality. And Zachary, thank you. If it is a reliable product as well, what kind of value are you getting out of it? Thank you for your responses. And if it is the best product available, thank you for your answers. That is exactly right. And so when I walk into a store, I have someone knock on my front door, they have to be good at selling this product. And of course, a lot of it has to do with reputation, the credibility, the warranty, the price, and I've heard a lot of different answers to this. And so if I became a salesman, in sales, we know that you're going to have to know your product very, very well. So just take me, Tony Hudson, for example. I'm going around selling vacuum sweepers at door to door, that if I want to be able to put food on my table or compete with the next person, I'm going to have to know the product very, very well. And so most likely I buy one, I have a few at my house, I try them out at the store or at the office, but I'm also going to have to know the market. What are other people charging, and what are the warranties? And so I'm going to have to become very good at that market. And third, I want to know what the customer wants. So a great salesperson is going to have to know those three things very, very well to be good at selling that product. Now, of course, in our job search, I want you to consider you being that product. And many times I've found, and we've graduated well over 1,800 people through our now 60-hour career academy. And of those 1,800 people, we found as we developed this program that a lot of people really didn't know who they were. So I see IPFW has a host of services that help provide with assessments and finding out a little bit more about what you want to do in your career, but also who you are. It is really hard to sell yourself if you don't know what you can bring to the table. So that's one of the biggest strategies, is you got to know what you can bring to the table. Regardless of the criminal background or not, if you don't know what you bring, you're not going to be able to sell yourself. So second, the market. What does the labor market look like? What is the industry that you're trying to seek out, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing? How does that look? As well as the customer. And in this circumstance, when it's your job search, who is the customer? And I think that's obvious. The customer is the employer. So we have, and if I go back to the previous slide, with Blue Jacket, our other tagline in our Career Academy, and what I'm trying to tell throughout this presentation, is that we want you to learn what employers want, because that is our customer. We have asked employers, we have polled, we have surveyed, and in fact we have a very large network of employers that give us feedback on what they are looking for in candidates for employment. So I hope to uncover a lot of that. Now, in communication, there is nonverbal and there is verbal, and of course it's going to be very difficult for me to give my nonverbal cues because I'm really not looking at the camera as much as I should be, but I am giving you more verbal in this webinar. And if you are able to gauge, and I'm going to allow a second poll, and I thank you for your participation, what do you think the percentage of communication is translated verbally? Meaning the words that I speak, the inflection, the tone, the English that I have a basic knowledge of, or non-verbally. What's the percentage of non-verbal communication that is translated from one human to another human? What do you think it is? Verbally or non-verbally? What do you think? I see Cheryl. Thank you for your answer. And as she's typing out her answer, I am going to also, I'll wait just one moment if you don't mind. Communication is translated throughout the job search quite a bit as well, and so those students that come to Blue Jacket are really hone in on their nonverbal skills. Cheryl, that is excellent. We out of 100% of our communication, we say it's 80%, but recent studies has been upward to 90% of our communication is transferred non-verbally. That's not only the way that we look, it's the way we conduct our eye contact, and what they say in the commercial, there's never a second chance for a first impression, and we agree to that. So when it comes to professional image, it's not just what we present personally, but it's also the way we are online as well. And so we make recommendations that in nonverbal communication, the moment you walk through that threshold of that company, it is good for all job seekers to know that an employer is gauging the way you look. Do you match the company. And I think this needs to be repeated because I need to stress this. Do you match the image of the company? From the moment that you get out of the car or off the bus or walking to that job, do you match that company? And if that professional image, and I skipped over including a few slides because Blue Jacket takes actually 2 days in our training, if you are ever interested in attending our training, to talk about nonverbal communication. It's not just talking, we do. In fact, we practice everything that we teach. So, first of all, first impression. I'm going to go over a little bit later, a little bit how that looks in an interview, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I want you to pay attention to number one, the voicemail message. How do you have ringback tones that maybe are not appropriate? Does your voicemail message articulate clearly how the person who could call you back, an HR representative, an employer, could get to know you a little bit from your voicemail message? Your email address. I think there are some pretty inappropriate email addresses out there that I've read when people are communicating with me, and it gives me an interesting perspective of them, as well as your Facebook. More often than not, I think you may know this, that employers are really looking at who you are based on what you post on Facebook. It also says a lot about you by the way that you fill out applications, the way your resume looks, and as well as your cold call all the way to the telephone conversation that you may be having with those human resource practitioners. And semiotics. Semiotics is the definition of semiotics. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And it's what it says about you. And so you could have perfect words in what you say, but it's the way you say it which matters much more important. Perception in your job search. Perception is reality. The way the employer perceives you is what they're going to think of you. Regardless if they've gotten a chance to get to know you or not, the way they perceive you is most important. So I know I'm moving through this somewhat quickly, but one of the biggest tips that I can give you right now is to practice, whether it's in front of a mirror or in front of some loved ones, your 30-second commercial. I want you to think that often you're at a job fair, or even that you are at an AA meeting or at church or at some group that you're working with other students. If someone is asking you, so tell me a little bit about yourself, Lindsay or Rachel, tell me a little bit about yourself. It is designed in this 30-second commercial, which an elevator pitch, it's called an elevator because what can you get out from the time that you get inside the elevator to the time that you get up to the 13th floor? Have you been able to say a little bit about yourself in those 13 floors, which is 30 seconds. So sometimes that's all the time you're going to be able to give. So yes, they're reading your nonverbals in that 30-second commercial, whether it's in a student group or you're volunteering somewhere, or you just happen to rub shoulders with an employer. But it introduces yourself and it tells the person a little bit about your skills, your experience, why you should be hired. And what we always tell everyone is to introduce yourself a second time. I'm not going to go through my 30-second commercial because I always get it wrong, but my elevator pitch would go something like, "Hello, Mr. Smith. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'd like to let you know that my name is Tony Hudson. I'm very interested in working for your corporation because my skills match XYZ PDQ." And then I'd tell them the reason why I should be hired at that company, and then I'd say, "Once again, my name is Tony Hudson. Thank you for giving me the opportunity." And we practice elevator pitches at Blue Jacket, and we feel like that confidence and the ability to stand in front of those decision makers that can change everything for you, it really starts to increase a great deal the more that you practice your elevator pitch. So that's very important. So we have some fundamentals at Blue Jacket as well. Yes, that's Abe Lincoln, and we say that the most important thing when it comes to your criminal background, whether it be on the application, you see the little image below, or in your interview, or even when you're communicating in that student group, to be honest. At all times, be honest. Do not lie about your criminal conviction, because 93% of employers are doing criminal backgrounds. Whether it's pre-hire or it's at the time of your promotion, they are doing criminal background checks. So be honest. The second is to do research. When we say do your research, that means before you walk through the threshold of that organization, when I mention do you match, Well, that is part of doing your research. Does the image that I'm projecting right now, whether I'm going to work at this weld shop, do I have on the same jeans, steel-toe boots, and the t-shirt that they seem to be wearing? Should I be wearing a polo perhaps? I'm not going to be wearing a tie going in and applying at a weld fab shop. But I'm going to do my research. I'm going to see how many jobs have been available in the last year, what their market is. Are they going on layoff? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing in their amount of work? Let's make sure that before you even start contacting that employer that you do a lot of research. I'm sure this is repeated a great deal throughout IPFW's career services, because how are you going to know that you're a good fit for that company if you don't know what that company is? And sometimes you patronize them. Perhaps you want to work as a restaurant manager, or you want to own a restaurant someday. And if you patronize that restaurant, you get a really good feel for the feel of that organization. I apologize. What we mention, whether it be on an application or in an interview, is to answer every single question. By avoiding the questions, for example, when an employer says, so tell me about your criminal background that you mentioned on your application, and you decide to avoid that question, that's an immediate red flag that goes up in the mind of that employer, and they'll never give you a second look. So leaving things blank on an application as well also provides the equal amount of red flags, whether it be with your criminal history or it's with your employment history. Leave nothing blank. Answer every question. And the fourth, less is more. We have seen so many people that have been through the criminal justice system or just had a one-time brush with the law that just went on and on and on talking about their criminal conviction and maybe telling a little bit too much. So we always recommend that less is more. You just give the facts. This is what happened. This is what I learned. And this is what I've done since then. If you'd like to know a little bit more about my criminal conviction, I'd offer you an opportunity to ask me more. But just cut to the chase, be very concise, and just do not say too much, because sometimes people have a tendency to get nervous and then put their foot in their mouth. So with those tips, I'd recommend not saying too much. I'm going to come back to those job search fundamentals, being honest, doing your research, answering every question, less is more, as we proceed throughout the interviewing component. Now, what we just tell people when it comes to filling out applications is it's just as good as leaving it blank if you use abbreviations. So that has a tendency to, for some reason with people at Blue Jacket, the individuals that come through our class with criminal background, that we have individuals that put NA, or even they put charges or their criminal conviction under that felony question. I have an HVAC. I have a habitual traffic violation, HTV, or OWI. And sometimes, and we've learned this not only through the books that we've read, that when you use abbreviations to people who are decision makers, they don't want to have to ask the question again, what does HTV mean? Spell it out, because they most likely do not know whenever you use an abbreviation, including NA. And when you use NA, remember, an employer is gauging if they can trust you or not. So the last thing an employer wants is someone who cuts corners, someone that can be perceived as lazy. And if you remember what I said at the beginning of this webinar, perception is reality. So if you put NA, that appears as if that you're lazy, and so we don't want them to get that impression. Dress appropriately, and appropriately means, what I usually make a recommendation is one step above what the managers wear there. So if it's a t-shirt, jeans, and steel toes, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps wear jeans, steel toes, and a polo. Or if they're wearing business casual, walk into the interview or to drop off the application wearing business professional, just one grade above what is expected. Go by yourself. In fact, I was eating downtown at Jimmy John's the other day, and I had a graduate walk through the door with her boyfriend. And that graduate handed off an application, and so did her boyfriend. And actually, they picked them up and they filled them out together. and they giggled and they talked and they felt it just didn't look very good. So whenever you go to fill out an application, go by yourself. So I also whispered in her ear and I said, just remember that employer is looking at you thinking that you're always going to have someone with you, or you need to have someone. You have this codependency issue that you can't show up by yourself to the job to fill out an application. So just remember that. We also make a recommendation just to take your own pen. Jockey doesn't show up to a horse race without his horse. So pen is expected to be used to fill out an application. We always recommend use that and print very neatly. Now, here's the million-dollar question. Have you ever been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor? And that's one variation of many that employers use to gauge, can I trust you or not? Because remember, past behavior predicts future behavior. And that's what an employer is thinking. Past behavior predicts future behavior. So if I'm going to hire someone at my daycare or at my restaurant, what are those felony convictions? And legally, I can ask that question. What are those felony convictions that are going to cause harm to the customers, to my employees, or to my company by hiring someone who has a history of this type of behavior? Now, of course, those of you who are participating in this webinar are working very hard to make sure that your past remains your past, that it does not define who you are right now. And I think if you, and I'm going to kind of mental aside for a moment. Before I get to this, to answering how we do this at Blue Jacket, we often tell everyone that the confidence from within yourself comes from the ability to, number one, forgive yourself. So that is your past. If you know that you're not going to do it again and you're convicted, make sure that you have an accountability system around you to prevent that from happening again. Because when you start to fill out applications and you graduate with your degree from IPFW, it'll be known. The employer is not stupid. They seldom employers have the wool pulled over their eyes with someone who says, yeah, I want to do what is right, but yet in the back of their mind they still want to deal drugs, or they still want to drink when they have alcoholism, or they still haven't dealt with their abuse issues. And my very strong suggestion is, if you want to be convicted with doing what is right in your life, number one, forgive yourself. Move forward. The past is the past. All right, with that said, have you ever been convicted? If you remember, and I'll give you a chance as I make a few more statements, if you remember the job search fundamentals, the 4 points that I made earlier, what do you think the best answer should be when it is yes or no? Have you ever been convicted? And so I'll give you a chance to answer yes or no, but some people do put no. And many people that come through Blue Jacket, they mention that, yeah, many times I have left that answer blank. I will answer no and then hope that they never check. But again, honesty is the most important thing. So, of course, Zachary, I thank you, is typing something. We educate all of our clients that come through Blue Jacket to answer yes. And I see that Lindsay wrote something earlier, less is more in turning a negative into a positive. Yeah, that is really good too. We'll talk about turning a negative into a positive. Zachary would write, yes, but I will explain in person at the interview. And Lindsay wrote, yes, I would like to discuss this upon the interview. And you know what? That is really, really good. Cheryl, yes. 995. 1995. I will come back to that too. One of the strategies, and we have a number of strategies, you'll learn many more strategies if you were to be able to attend Blue Jacket's Career Academy, but the ones that I'm going to give you in this webinar follow. Tell them what it is not. For example, I have been convicted, say for example, of a dealing drugs. So it is not violent, it is not a sex offense, and I see that the video is frozen. So is that all right, or is that just on this computer? Okay, I apologize. So I have a dealing drugs charge, and if I have, if it's not violent and it's not a sex offense, it's not a theft charge, sometimes people make a recommendation that, yes, I've been convicted of a non-violent, non-theft, non-sex offense, and non-work related because I was dealing drugs, outside of the job, then they follow up with what comes next. It has also been another strategy for people, and it is risky, just to tell them what it is. Now, I'd like for you to really take into consideration taking advantage, for those of you who have not been convicted for a very long time, to say, yes, I have been convicted, but it was 15 years ago, or yes, I was convicted of a drug dealing charge in 1992. And what an employer wants to know is, have you been clean since then? Have you not been in trouble since? And remember, trust, and that's the number one thing. Trust takes time and it takes effort. So they're going to be able to gauge from the application as well as your interview, have you been putting in the effort and the time to make sure that you're not going to do it again? So yes, you have a lot of behaviors since then that say, hey, I'm a law-abiding, productive member of society. You can give me a shot at this employment. But yes, Indiana's an at-will state. They do have employers do have a right to ask about your criminal conviction, and some of them, yes, thank you, Cheryl. Some ask about 5 or 7 or 10-year convictions. Some ask about 5 or 7 or 10-year convictions. What then? So if you've been convicted within the last 10 years, then say yes. If you have not been convicted, say your criminal charge, Cheryl, was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And the question is, have you been convicted of a felony or misdemeanor within the last 10 years? Then if no is your answer, then make it no. If you have not been convicted of a felony conviction within that time frame, then your answer is truth, and you have to make sure that you tell the truth. Cheryl, will you respond and let me know if I answered your question? Now, some people feel pretty comfortable in saying that, yes, I've been convicted of an OWI, and I'm trying to trick you. OWI is operating while intoxicated. Sometimes that looks really ugly, and it depends on what kind of industry you're looking toward working. So my suggestion would be to, number one, tell them what it isn't and what it is, not what it is, and if you feel comfortable with it, go ahead and tell them what it is. Now, if there's, again, a length of time there, make sure you put the date. Yeah, I was convicted of a drug dealing charge in 1995. Now, I had some really great answers. Zachary and Lindsay put yes, but I will explain, and Lindsay put I would like to discuss. And the way that we, in our strategy, if I were able to write this in that little column, the way I would put it is, yes, I was convicted of a nonviolent, non-sex, non-work-related conviction in 1995. May I please have the opportunity to explain in an interview? And so what that does is it changes the perspective. When you write, I would like to discuss, it sounds presumptuous, as if, hey, I already got the interview and I'm going to discuss it when you call me in. And in fact, you haven't gotten the interview yet. So you still have to show that you understand your place, that you may not be granted that opportunity, but you would like to have that opportunity. And so Lindsay was pretty close. I would like to discuss this upon interview, but I'd still say, hey, you know what, you're still not the decision maker yet. You want to work for that company. The company is the ultimate decision maker when it comes to your employment there. So your position right now would be that you are asking for the opportunity to get that interview. So may I please have the opportunity to discuss this in an interview? And sometimes people don't write yes or no, and they just write would like to discuss, or may I please have the opportunity. I still think that works against you. Still write yes, and whatever fills in the blank, whatever matches your criminal conviction, your past a little bit better, fill that in. Whether you say what it isn't or whether you say what it is and the time frame, that all is going to depend on your individual experiences. And I see Cheryl has another. Yes, you answered it, but some, it is just open. Have you ever been convicted? Cheryl, you are absolutely right. And then you're going to have to answer still honestly. And because too often have I seen a lot of people very depressed when they come back with their tail between their legs to Blue Jacket and tell us what they did. That they lied on an application or they left it blank and it never came up in an interview. And then when they finally did the drug screen and the criminal background, they let them go 5 days later. And it was 5 days after they realized it's one of their dream jobs, rather than just coming out and telling them the truth. And of course, we talk a great deal about this in an interview, our interview component, and I'll get to that in a moment. I see it's 12:30, and so I have a lot more material to go through. But this is one thing that the government does provide you. Having a felony conviction is the Federal Fidelity Bond. Fidelity Corporation provides you with a bond. For those of you who may encounter an employer that say, yeah, I don't know about our insurance, we can't hire you because our insurance says, I always say that's horse feathers. Many times employers say, yeah, I don't know if I can hire you because of insurance. Usually it has something to do other than insurance, because they may have 5 people with criminal convictions working out on the floor. Sometimes it has something to do with your appearance. Do you match the company? Do you have visible tattoos? Did you show up in sweats? Did you show up late? Those are all factors why employers just take the easy route. Hey, my insurance, they won't let us hire felons. Sometimes that is the case in the field of construction. There are a lot of construction workers out there that have criminal backgrounds, but when it comes to working really high on scaffold, there are a lot of construction companies that did research into those who are higher at taking risks, and so when they're looking at workers' comp policies and how to decrease risk, typically people with criminal backgrounds are higher risk takers. So there is also something called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. However, that has not been refunded this year. So the Work Opportunity Tax Credit is no longer something that we market, it was a credit to employers for giving people with criminal backgrounds a chance. But this federal bonding program, we help fill out paperwork for the employer. In fact, when they become our employee, because we have our own staffing company, we bond each and every person, and it insures in increments of $5,000 all the way up to $25,000. So if an employer says to you, you take out the barrier, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can hire someone who has a theft charge here at this restaurant, then you can say, well, let me tell you a little bit about this Federal Fidelity Bond. And I'd recommend getting online and just keyword searching in Google Federal Fidelity Bond, and that will make it a lot easier for you just to print out some paperwork. They have paperwork for you to hand to them, and you say, hey, this bond covers me between $5,000 to $25,000 worth of damages that are lost if I ever burn my saddle and I want to steal something from you. But you know what? That was then, and I made a really big mistake. And then I'll coach you about how you can work with that in an interview in just a moment. A lot of what I heard from employers is that having a conviction is not an automatic no, but lying about it shows you're untrustworthy. Lindsay, you are dead on. There are hundreds and thousands of employers just in Allen County that are willing to give a second chance. We have the list. We partner with them. So if that is a truth, which it is in our world, then the reality is employers are willing to overlook their criminal conviction. In fact, if you do the statistics, 1 out of every 4 individuals that are sitting, whether it's in your classroom right now or just driving down the street, 1 out of every 4 individuals have been in trouble with the law before. It doesn't mean they're a felon, but it means they've been in trouble. So I would have a sensitivity that most employers have family members, friends, employees, maybe themselves been in trouble before. And in fact, Blue Jacket, 7.5 years into this, now have managers and owners of companies that are graduates of Blue Jacket, now turning around hiring other people with criminal backgrounds, which is really neat to see. So I'd like to proceed forward and give you some additional tips. The bonding program is just one barrier, one thing to take out a barrier. First, as Forrest Gump would say, get off your buttocks. So, of course, you're working at IPFW. You may have a full-time or a part-time job. You're in school. But what we tell many, many, many people that come to Blue Jacket, spend at least 20 hours per week doing your work. Now, that doesn't mean 20 hours a week, dropping off application after application after application. In fact, I have seen so many people spend so many wasted hours dropping off applications with a criminal background because they didn't do their research. Do they even know if this company hires people with criminal backgrounds in the first place? Well, if you haven't done your research, whether it be through networking or making a cold call or even just patronizing that organization, then it sounds like that's a lot of wasted time. So out of those 20 hours, the great majority of that's going to be researching. 20% of that should be applying for employment. And as I always say, online research gets you so much further than 15, 20 years ago, but it's not what you know, it's who you know. And Fort Wayne is I've heard so many times, the world's biggest small town. And you are 3 people away from knowing everyone, not only in this city, but from knowing everyone in the country. 3 people away. Or 6 degrees of separation, but we say 3 people away. And so there are ways to network that we've made a lot of recommendations to our clients. And so in networking, that also means that when you're doing your volunteer work or you're going to your kids' activities or you're here at school, that you are always finding a new way to uncover who is employing, do they hire people with criminal backgrounds, and are they looking for someone with this skill set, which is my skill set. So networking is incredibly important. And of course, cold calling. Those are the 5 tips, but those aren't just tips at Blue Jacket, the way that we do it. We actually enforce this as well. And so we have high expectation of our board of directors, high expectation of our staff. Equally, we have high expectation of those that are so hungry for a second chance that, number 1, get off your butt. Number 2, spend a lot of time job searching and researching, because if you don't match the company, don't even waste the time filling out the application. Networking and cold calling. One thing about networking that I'd like to tell you a little bit about, there was one person that came, this wasn't even on our radar. There's a gentleman that came into Blue Jacket one time and he said, you know what, I am part of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said that he got really wise at this. It was a recommendation from his aunt that he was sitting in a group and he said, hello, my name is, and I'm just going to throw out a name, my name is John. And I am an electrician and I'm a journeyman and I have been out of work for 6 months. I have a criminal background. I'm also dealing with alcoholism, but I'm so hungry to do what needs to be done to get a job. And then they go around the circle and introduce themselves. But rather than just saying, hi, I'm John, I'm an alcoholic, he was able to do his pitch, and out of that, he got a job. And so a lot of people are doing that nowadays. When they get an opportunity to meet new people, they are finding that as a great way to network. But I have always recommended for anyone who has been convicted of a criminal charge, that the best way that an employer is going to warm up to you, as well as your own family and the community, is if you've given back to the community that you once took from. Regardless if it was a victimless crime or not, have you given back? Do you volunteer at your church? Do you volunteer at the food bank? Do you volunteer at Blue Jacket or at IPFW? What do you do to give back to this community? Because one of the ways to right your wrong is to give back to the community you once took from. And taking means from taxpayers to go to court, law enforcement, all of that stuff. So if you are volunteering, you are smack dead right on. And not only does volunteerism help you in your spirit and help the community, but it also helps you in your job search because you list it on your resume. But then you have a manager who's overseeing you that becomes one more of your references when it comes to your work ethic and your ability to do what is right in your life. So I have found with people that have been in prison for 15 years or have never worked a day in their life, that when they start volunteering, and we have this this big network of nonprofits that we partner with, but there's this one food distribution and material distribution nonprofit that we send a lot of volunteers to. And she, the manager of this, has found so many jobs for individuals because she becomes such a great reference for them, that really Blue Jacket's done nothing but make a connection with a place for someone to give back. And I would say 85% of them end up with jobs that go over and volunteer for this lady. So my recommendation with networking is volunteering. Now, of course, when we mention what employers want, there are 2 things, the top 2 out of 8 of the 9 answers of this question. What do employers want? And this was based on a survey from the U.S. Census Bureau back in, I think, 2002, I believe, or 2000. that they said, number one, that our clients, that my candidate has a good attitude. My employee has a good attitude. Number two, they have good communication skills. Not just non-verbally, but verbally, and they can communicate what they want very well, and they can listen very well. And those two things are called soft skills. We spend an entire day, Blue Jacket does, talking about the difference between soft and hard skills. Soft skills are transferable. They go with you job to job. It's the way you speak, the way you look, the way you carry yourself. And soft skills are what employers want, as much as hard skills. And hard skills, are translated in, okay, their previous work experience, that's important. Are they recommended by an employee of mine or a former employer? What kind of credentials do they have in the industry? What is their education? Education is very important. You know that because you're here at IPFW. How well do they do on the application, the test that we provided to them before they came to our company? And what kind of performance did they have while they were at IPFW? Those are all very important, but when you see the rating, it doesn't matter how well you did, how great your GPA is, or how well you did on the test. If you have a poor attitude and you come through the threshold of that company with a poor attitude, the likelihood is going to be less that you're going to get that job, especially if you avoided the criminal background questions. And same thing here with with another Census Bureau report: honesty, teamworking skills, interpersonal skills, motivation, initiative, and strong work ethic all play a major role in how much an employer desires to hire you. So those aren't hard skills again. These are very important soft skills. So I'm just going to go over a resume really quick. We take 2 days designing and understanding and learning about a resume and composing those at Blue Jacket. But it's a tool. And again, you're the salesperson. You have to put into print on your resume your skills, your experience, and your education, because again, you're selling yourself. And remember that it has to be a short resume. You spend less time, or an employer spends 10 to 15 seconds skimming your resume, because if they have an available position, remember there are hundreds of other resumes coming in at the same time. We always make a recommendation to never go beyond 2 pages, and 1 page is desired. In fact, I have my entire resume on 1 page, and I've been working since I was 15, so the last close to 25 years I have been working, and how am I going to fit all of that on 1 piece of paper? Well, there's a lot of work that I'm not putting on my resume. And make sure as you're developing your objective statement that you've done your research into this position as well as the company. And yes, Cheryl, Career Services should have told you that volunteer work is just as important as employment, and so we do that as well. We separate resumes with these 3 different types of resumes, which Career Services probably teaches very similarly. That there's a chronological resume, there's a functional, and there's a combination resume. Functional is really focusing on the skills, what you can do. Chronological resume is focusing on the amount of time that you spent on that job as well as your duties on the job. But a combination resume is combining both the amount of time that you've worked for a company as well as your skills. And if you volunteered somewhere for a long time, yeah, it's just as important as a job. And so I wouldn't discredit that, especially on a functional resume that you spent, say for example, 2 years working at the food bank. List the years that you were volunteering at that food bank. I think it's very important. Very good point, Cheryl. Thank you. So yeah, I spent very little time on the resume because I wanted to get a little bit more into what factors. If I had a pen, I'd be marking on the vote column, and I'm sorry I didn't take that out, Ashley. But if you were to vote, what do you think number 1 is most important? I think I led you into answering this already, that employers say communication is very important, job qualifications, image and appearance is important, but what factor most impacts the interview is your attitude. Yes, you could look and dress the same as the company. Your qualifications could be perfect, identical match. Your communication could be spot on. But if your attitude doesn't fit, that matters a great deal. So attitude, you may see, is replicated time and time again. So we've dealt with a lot of individuals that have been through Blue Jacket with criminal backgrounds, and And we found that use proper English, that vocabulary is one of those bigger barriers to employment. That if you're using slang, remember abbreviations, that's not very good. But when you start to use slang or you begin to swear in an interview, you've already lost the job. So if you use slang, I think I have a slide coming up, but when sometimes there are employers asking, so tell me a little bit about how you, tell me a little bit about your background. And they say, well, I caught a case or I caught a charge. No one understands what that means. A criminal conviction doesn't flutter around like a butterfly, so you didn't just catch it. You were committed, or you were convicted of a crime, and so they want to know the same severity of that. So do not use slang when it comes to your background or your case or even your probation officer or your PO. Make sure that you use proper English for that. Answer the questions and give examples. And so sometimes they'll give you closed-ended questions like, were you convicted? And that's a yes or no answer, but still if they say, were you convicted, provide an example at the tail end of that. Be clear and concise, as I've already mentioned. Whatever you do in the interview, especially when it comes to you becoming impassioned or maybe a little bit nervous, don't cut off or interrupt the interviewer. Speak confidently, especially about your criminal background. I'll tell you again how we do that and how we coach individuals who have backgrounds. Don't use words that you don't know. I have many times been witness to people who try to use big words to impress the interviewer, use the words that you have inside of you because they'd rather see the authentic person sitting across the table than someone who doesn't know the words that they're using. Be personable and professional. Try not to be a suck-up, but be personable with your choice of words. And with nonverbal communication, again, what percentage? 80%. That's very important. Now, we always recommend that when you give a handshake, it needs to be firm, web to web. When you're shaking someone's hand, make sure that it's not bone crunching. We have a lot of guys coming back from prison with that prison muscle going on, and so they have a tendency to squeeze a little bit too hard. That shows a little bit non-verbally that this person has an aggression issue, whether they mean it or not. They just happen to be a little bit strong. Let the interviewer take the lead on that handshake, by the way. The person of higher status will always, in any social circumstance, take that, will initiate that handshake. Make sure that you're always looking the interviewer in the eye. Make sure you blink. Don't look creepy, but whenever you're giving an answer, look them in the eye. And the posture is very important as well. If you're sitting straight up or leaning slightly forward, that shows that you're interested. If you slouch or if you're too uptight, then those are also red flags. This as well, this nonverbal communication at Blue Jacket, we take an entire 3-hour class to go over. Here I'm trying to do it in a matter of 2 minutes, so I apologize for my brevity. Your hands are also important. You can explain with your hands. I do a lot. But not too much, because then it looks like you're maybe dancing or popping and locking or something, as we always mention. But the more that you fidget will be a distraction for the employer, so try not to tap your pen or your foot. These are all tips that I'm sure that you can get from Career Services, and I'm sure they can do that just as well and better on providing tips in interviewing. But we have found typically those that come through Blue Jacket, those are some of the issues. And when it comes to nerves, sometimes some people smile too much and sometimes they do not smile at all. Smiling is infectious, not only in the interview, but when you're getting the call from the employer or you're making a cold call to find out some information. Smiling is infectious, and it really does impact. You can hear a smile through the phone. So that's also important as well. Now, why does an employer need to know about your criminal background? Well, of course, to find out if you're trustworthy, past behavior, right? To measure your ability to turn negatives into a positive. I think Cheryl or Lindsay mentioned that earlier, that if you can say, you know what I learned from my criminal background was life-changing, and what has happened to me since has defined who I am as a mother, as a father, as an employee, as a student. And if you're able to show how that has changed you, we have all made mistakes. And that is one thing that we can all associate with. An employer and a human being, that we're all fallible. We are all broken in some way, and we make mistakes. So if you're able to show, you know what, I made a mistake and I really regret it, an employer will look very kindly upon that. And I'll go over that in a moment. But why else do they need to know? Typically isn't to discover dirt on you. They'll discover dirt on you by looking up your Facebook page, as long as you keep it clean, right? Or to make you feel guilty. They do it because they want to protect their assets. And remember, the biggest resource for employers, and I'm going to repeat this for you, the biggest resource for an employer is their human resource. Sometimes between 70 and 90%. Traditionally, it has been their human resource, not their asset, not their property, and sometimes it depends on what kind of employer, but typically it is their human resource. And so if that human resource is going to cost them a lot of money, and we have that gauged, how much it costs an employer for turnover, then they're not going to hire you if they don't trust you're going to be there for a long time. Now, when do you bring up your criminal background? At the very first opportunity that is presented. Say, for example, an employer says, hey, I see you have a time gap here between Company X and Company Y on your resume. And then, could you tell me a little bit about what did you do then? Then it is an opportunity to bring up your criminal background. And here's my recommendation. Thank you for asking. In fact, I've been meaning to tell you that I was arrested for XYZ crime, and I went away to jail for 6 months. I lost my job. I regret it. I made a really big mistake, and I can guarantee you, and now remember, this is for those of you who are convicted that you're going to do right here in the future. I can assert and guarantee you that I will never commit that type of crime again, and I will never be in trouble in the future. I've heard that from a lot of people, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. They're going to say, hey, why did you leave your last job? Or they're going to say, hey, you're unavailable on Mondays or Fridays, and you have like a reentry court or a drug court or some type of court activity. Make sure that you're putting that on your application as well, that the days that you are and are not available, because you never want to surprise an employer with that. And you ask for a chance to explain your offense in an interview. Would you like to explain now? Usually when you take charge of what has happened in your past, you will find that the response is so much greater. Now, if you wait for the employer to bring it up, remember you're going to be put on the defensive. And whenever a human being is put on the defensive, they skew the way that they respond. They skew the way that the words come out of their mouth. We want you to be able to respond confidently and be able to answer that question, but also take control of it. Hey, I see you have a time gap. What did you do? Well, I thank you very much for asking. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what happened to me in 1996. And so what we give other tips, and those tips are this. I'm gonna fast forward because I see we only have 8 minutes left. And we talk a little bit about redemption stories. And you may have seen that I passed over the Grinch and Groundhog Day and Scrooge, because every redemption story in there every redemption story has a beginning, middle, and end. A person commits a terrible act, has a troubled past. The middle is, okay, a challenge or a crisis forces him or her to see the errors and change for good. In the end is the person changes for the better and becomes a productive member, right? But remember, it always includes someone becoming redeemable again. It's not just someone saying, hey, I redeem you, or I forgive you, or I trust you again. It is a person who is malleable again, that says, okay, I want to themselves, I want to change, I want to do what is right for myself. So that redemption story, we all have that. Now here's some convincing steps for you to be able to tell an employer that you want to be employed by them. Sometimes it's best just to state your most recent conviction and the date of that conviction. Don't state all 15 of them if you have them. And what we always do for any person that comes through Blue Jacket is to pull your own criminal background. Take that note, write it down, pull your own criminal background. The Allen County Bureau of Identification, they charge $7. Pull it. Why? Because sometimes you forget or you leave out some things that may be showing up on your criminal background that they end up seeing, and they think, oh, did they just lie to me? So it's very important that you know exactly what the employer is looking at, and it's identical. So number one, state your most recent conviction. So if you have a burglary charge in 1998 and in 2000 and 2, you have a theft conviction. I'd mentioned, say, my most recent conviction is a theft conviction in 1992, and this is what I've done since then to never fall victim to those poor decisions ever again. Number 2, express your sense of remorse, sorrow, regret if you have it. Because if you show an employer that you really don't care, it's kind of flippant about it. You know what, I caught a case, I really don't care about it anymore, or yeah, I was convicted of a theft and it won't happen to your company. Well, sometimes an employer wants to see that that you regret what you did, and you have to express that to them. Why? Why do you regret it? And sometimes, and be prepared for this, the employer is going to say, if you make a response, well, I was different then, or I was younger then, and I had a guy who was 19 who was convicted of a crime when he was 18, and he was in a mock interview with an employer, and actually this employer was going to give him a shake at a job. He said, I was younger then, and he looks at him and he thought, that was just a year ago. How were you younger then? What have you learned? Well, it's all about family now. And he was like, well, you had a family last year, didn't you? And so you have to remember that you have to be prepared to answer what has changed inside of you as a result of that remorse, the sorrow, the regret. What have you learned from your experience? Because they can see right through you if you can't articulate what you have learned from your experience. And also tell them what you've done or what you're doing differently now. So if you are driving under the influence, or if you are dealing drugs, what have you done to change your life? And they're going to look at your actions, not what your intentions are. Never your intentions, but what you're doing now. Here's what we make a recommendation. Always be prepared to talk about it. I would make a recommendation to practice with your loved ones, those who know about your criminal past. Talk about it. Practice it so that they can come in at a lot of different angles as if in an interview. Tell me about your circumstance and make sure that it's convincing. Always be honest. Ask whether the interviewer has additional questions. Typically, an interviewer in this social setting will not ask additional questions if they feel fulfilled with the answer that you gave them. And if you've been proficient with the information, that is good. I was convicted of a theft charge in 1992. I was really hard up for money. I made a bad decision because I thought I wouldn't get caught. I also believed that it was my right to be able to take this money from my employer, and I learned a lot. I mean, I served time, I hurt my family, I hurt myself, and it'll never happen again. In fact, it hasn't happened since 1992. It hasn't happened that long, 20 years. If you have any other questions about it, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And typically, that employer will not ask them. Also, I'll offer positives to it. You know what? When I was sitting in that prison cell, a lot of things came very clear to me. And so I have been convicted to do XYZ PDQ from this point forward. Oh, and here's a person who I met along the way. And here's how I have a new accountability person or a mentor. And make sure that you offer positives as a result of what happened with that criminal conviction. And whatever you do, take responsibility. Oh, I didn't know that they were going in to burglarize the house when I was sitting outside waiting in the car. They came back in, they told me to drive fast, and I did. When I hear that, I realize that when you can't take responsibility for your past, you'll never take responsibility for your future. And so when I'm going to hire you and something goes wrong, who's the last person to take responsibility? The person in the interview who blamed everyone else. So don't avoid the issue. Whatever you do, do not lie. Do not blame others, and do not give attitude and use slang. Remember, I told you that caught a case. And remember, when you minimize offense, oh, I was just convicted of an OWI. I remember there was a mock interviewer who came in whose wife was killed by someone who was a drunk driver. And he since forgave that person, and he wanted to give back to Blue Jack and be a mock interviewer. And there was a person sitting across the table saying it was just an OWI. And he said, well, you just lost the job with me, and you know why? My wife was killed by a drunk driver. So just remember, do not minimize the offense, because to some people it is an incredibly large offense. And if I were able to round that up, if you remember, I was going to go back and say it's actually 92% of employers do criminal background checks, not 93. My recommendations are this: network, 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 intern, commit to volunteer, and if you do commit to do such a thing, follow through with it. Complete your degree. No one wants to see you do anything halfway. Do it all the way and follow Murphy's Law. And Murphy's Law is what can go wrong will go wrong. my suggestion is, if you're tempted to go back to the old life or make a mistake the way that you did before and think that you're not going to get caught, you will. You will get caught. You'll get in trouble. So Murphy's Law states, just stay straight, do the right thing. So I have 1 minute left, Ashley, and I'm sorry, for you to be able to ask any questions. And if you would like to, we have a website at bluejacketinc.org. My email address is on that website under the staff page, or you're more than welcome to give me a call at 744-1900. My name is Tony Hudson at Blue Jacket, 744-1900, area code 260. If you have any additional questions or you'd like to find out how to